Last up, but certainly not least today, we have Elly Teman, who is presenting on their recent graphic novel, which was made with Juja Berand, titled A Tale of Two Surrogates, Visualizing Ethnography in a Graphic Medicine Narrative. So just to introduce Elly, Elly Teman is a cultural and medical anthropologist who specializes in the anthropology of reproduction. Her recent graphic novel, co-authored with Juja Berand and illustrated by Andreas Skaber, A Tale of Two Surrogates, a graphic narrative of assisted reproduction, is based on decades of ethnographic research on gestational surrogacy. It is part of the graphic medicine series at Penn State University Press. Elly's first book, Birthing a Mother, The Surrogate Body and the Pregnant Self, has received several book awards, including the Eileen Basker Memorial Prize from the Society for Medical Anthropology. Thank you, Elly.
Thank you. I'm going to share the screen.
Sure.
Can you all see my full screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Perfect.
I'll start the timer for you
now. Arden, if the slides don't advance or something, can you let me know?
I will do, yeah, sure.
Okay, so thank you all. I am going to talk today a little about the creation of the graphic novel that I wrote with Juja Berand and that was illustrated by Andreas Skiba. And it was published just a month ago. So what is graphic medicine, the series in which our book was published? Well, graphic medicine is a discipline based on a term that talks about comics as a tool for exploring the intersection of health, illness, and caregiving. And traditionally, graphic medicine was memoir-based. So the series has books by doctors, by nurses, by people who are patients or caregivers. This book, My Degeneration, The Journey Through Parkinson's Disease. There's also collections of books, for instance, COVID Chronicles by physicians who worked on COVID wards, and the Menopause Comic Collection, Menopause a Comic Treatment. So, and then there have recently been some textbooks, such as Graphic Public Health. After around 20 or so books in the series, our book is the first graphic ethnography, bringing sociological and anthropological ethnographic research into graphic medicine in this series. So our book, we call it a comparative ethnographic graphic novel, which is quite a mouthful to pronounce. And as Arden said, my book, Birthing a Mother, The Surrogate Body and the Pregnant Self, told the stories of surrogates and intended mothers and the relationships that they formed between them. So what interests me most is body boundaries, embodiment, surrogate intended parent relationships. And my colleague Juja's book looked at meaning making among virtual communities of surrogates in the United States, and her book was published in 2016. And after we had both written these ethnographies of surrogacy, one in Israel and one in the US, we started to write comparative articles. And so we wrote comparative articles about the legal consciousness of surrogates in both countries, the way they make sense of motherhood and non-motherhood, the way that they articulate familial identity and belonging to their own children. And then after we did all these comparative academic articles, well, this is where our book began. It began, there's me and Juja and the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia. During the pandemic in 2020, when we were both feeling really stuck within the walls of our apartments, I wrote an email out of the blue to Juja and I said, why don't we do something creative? Why don't we create an ethnographic graphic novel? Why don't we turn all of our research into something new? And Juja said, are you crazy? And I said, yes, but let's do it anyway. And so I said to her, this is the culmination of all our work because we really want to make our work more accessible to people undergoing infertility or people who are working as caregivers that accompany people through surrogacy. And I said, why don't we make a fictional story based on our research, and will have a wider impact if it's a fictional narrative, but based on empirical work. And so we created two composite characters, and these composite characters were based both on the main demographics of the women who were surrogates in our research and based on the kind of compilation of many women in our research together. We have Jen from California, and we have Donna from Tel Aviv. Both, like most surrogates in our research, were heterosexual married women with an average of 3 children. So each of our characters have 3 kids. And we wrote this graphic novel to tell a comparative parallel narrative. So the chapters go from Jen's story to Donna's story, Jen's story to Donna's story, but according to one united story arc that takes the reader through a surrogacy journey from the first idea through the process of the legal and bureaucratic loopholes, then the pregnancy, beginning with embryo transfers, and the post-birth, so up to a year after the birth. So one thing that led us through this whole process was not to do a dramatic depiction like we often see on Netflix or on in the movies. We didn't want to bring out cultural myths about surrogacy, but to be really clear on what came out of our research data. So Jen, for instance, becomes interested in surrogacy just like most surrogates in Zhuzha's data. She's sitting in the dentist's office, she sees a magazine article, and she thinks, I can do this. And little by little, she comes to the conclusion as she's picking up her kids at soccer and doing all of the regular things in her daily life, she comes to the conclusion that she really wants to do this. Whereas Donna, like most of the women in my research, she falls in love with a story that she consumes through the media of a wonderful surrogacy journey. And she falls in love with this idealistic, romanticized version of surrogacy. And this is a theme that goes throughout the book, the kind of distance between the ideal and the actual. So the first stage of our work was to write a script, and the script started with us outlining all the major themes that came out of each of our research. So we started with motivations, about convincing their marital partner, about how they talk about it with their extended family, because surrogates also have moms and dads and sisters and brothers and neighbors. The relationship with the intended parents was something we wanted to go throughout the book. Medicalization and how surrogates respond to the hormone shots and to the side effects of the medical treatments, and of course the theme of gift relationships and that kind of dichotomy between commodity and gift within the stories. Then we took all the quotes that we took dozens of quotes, and we put them under each of the themes. When Zhuzha took one chapter with her quotes, and I would take a chapter with my quotes. And we transformed these quotes, the main quotes, into dialogues between the surrogates and the people in their lives, plus between surrogates and the online forums or online groups in which they discussed surrogacy with those around them. And we formed a script. Our first script looked something like this. It was just a list of what goes on in each panel that we imagined, both visually and the dialogues. The second stage was to create a storyboard. And so the first storyboards we created were in PowerPoint. We storyboarded the entire book for over a year before we even looked for an artist to draw it. So this is an example of a storyboard for a chapter on Jen convincing her husband to be on board with this. And we made sure in the storyboard always to have exact reference photos of what Jen's home would look like, what the clinic would look like in LA, what the street view outside of Donna's window would look like in Tel Aviv, what the Costco where Jen shops in LA would look like. This is a picture of what the storyboard ended up as in the graphic novel. Visual accuracy about technology was really important, what ultrasounds would look like at different stages of the pregnancy, what an embryo transfer looks like, what kind of birth each surrogate would have, and facial expressions to show our artist what we wanted the face to look like when Jen is upset or when Donna is excited. Then we looked for an artist. It took us a while. We went through hundreds of online freelancer profiles until we found Andrea. And Andrea was exactly what we had wanted. His art was exactly what we had dreamed of. And the process with Andrea happened in this way. I would send through a chat a PowerPoint to Andrea. He would make an initial sketch, then it would go from me to Juja, back and forth to Andrea until he had inked and lettered every single page in the book. Each page took around a week and a half. Key dilemmas that came up from our work. The first dilemma was how to depict the passing of time, because surrogacy takes a long time. For our interviewees and research subjects, it took around 2 to 3 years for a surrogacy journey. So we decided that we would do it through the Jewish calendar. The surrogates in my research were all Jewish, and we would do it through the US consumer calendar. And in the US, the surrogate Jen goes through Halloween and 4th of July, for instance, twice to show the passing of time. Another key dilemma was how to depict metaphors from our work visually. And so we would think about whether the metaphor should come at the beginning or come at the end. For instance, surrogate Donna goes through an obstacle course, and she thinks about surrogacy as a roller coaster. And these depict themes that came out of my research. Another thing was how to show global comparisons of surrogacy in other countries when our data is on Israel and the United States. Well, we chose from some of our favorite ethnographies of surrogacy in India and Russia and Thailand. One quote of a surrogate or of intended parents, and we illustrated that quote with, of course, referencing the book in which they were done. Another question was how to depict the virtual online support groups. And so we came to the conclusion that we would depict the US surrogate Jen consulting with a Greek chorus of these women who she's imagining as birth goddesses. And here's the Greek chorus, and that allowed us to bring in the voices of other surrogates within Juja's research and to show the collective meaning making that goes on within the virtual forums that she studied. And then in my research, which surrogates would go in WhatsApp groups and in Facebook groups, we depicted them as a group of runners on the obstacle course, a kind of athletic competition, which also shows some of the selective nature of Israeli surrogacy, in which many women cannot pass the committee that allows each and every legal contract to be approved. Another thing was how to depict what we're used to as thick description in anthropological and sociological work with minimal text. It was very hard for us to let go of words. And so we used a lot of full panels, such as this one, where Donna gets the bad news that her embryo transfer has failed, and she looks at herself in the mirror as the determined runner on the obstacle course for round 2. Another thing was to take not just emotional issues and moments, but also ethical dilemmas, and depict them as we see here, Jen deciding whether or not to allow the doctor to implant more than 2 embryos. And we show her here in a spotlight weighing the options. So practical matters. I know I'm almost out of time. One, we didn't take into consideration the time commitment. It took a total of 4 years to complete this book, 2 of which we worked with Andrea. How to fund the project, it ended up being very expensive, and we had to apply for a lot of grants to cover it, and we were lucky enough to get 2 grants that did fund the majority. How to find the right publisher. Anthropology and sociology are not yet there with publishing graphic ethnographies, and we were very lucky to find a home in the graphic medicine series. Revisions, this did go through academic peer review, and so the revisions made it so that if we had most of the book in black and white, like here, we were told in the revisions to shade it. So Andrea had to go again through every page and shade it. How to create more drama, which was one of the comments in the revisions. And then last minute things like page layout, which we hadn't taken into consideration, that when you submit a graphic novel to a publisher, it has to be in InDesign and in a certain size of pages. So we made a website, and it's called surrogacygraphicnovel.com. And here we put all of our surrogacy research, individual and combined. And we thought it could be a good base for people who are want to learn more, to go into our research, and we have full text links to all of our research there. Thank you. Exactly on time.
Thank
Yay.
you so much. Thank you so much, Elly. What a fantastic presentation to round off the session. And yeah, again, perfectly on time, yourself and now. Yeah, incredibly with timing today. So yeah, thank you all from this session. It's been fantastic. And we have a good amount of time now, I think about 20 minutes until the end of the session, for a Q&A. If some more people would like to turn on their cameras, no pressure, but that would make the Q&A feel a bit more collaborative. But again, no worries if not. So to kick us off, I'm going to start with you, Elly, since you presented just now. Yeah, it was a fantastic presentation, and I'm really intrigued by this idea of graphic ethnography. It's something that's quite new and something that you've not really seen done much before. But I was wondering, while you were kind of envisioning this, was there any point where you thought maybe we should write a book, maybe we should do a film? Were there any other forms or genres that you were thinking about putting this research through the lens of, or?
The whole idea for this came from me feeling frustrated within the pandemic, that I wanted to do something creative, but knowing as an academic that I always have to produce something academic. And then I thought, wow, writing a graphic novel would be a creative outlet that would also be counted on the clock of professorship, maybe. And to animate the book is something I would love to do, because I really also want to work on translations, because if anyone has seen recently in Italy, for instance, surrogacy was banned, and even for people bringing babies in from abroad. And I think having an empirical depiction like this could help people learn more about surrogacy beyond the myths.
Yeah, and how, just to follow up that point, how do you navigate the kind of ethical and moral questions that a lot of people do have about surrogacy and bodily autonomy? How did you represent these women's stories, respectfully and authentic
It
while
really
still
it's
having.
a challenge,
Yeah.
right? So that's where the additional characters come in. So each surrogate has a sister who challenges her with all the stereotypical questions, and each surrogate has a mother or a friend who challenges her with the ethical questions. And then there's also the kind of characters that bring up the religious and feminist critiques. And so the surrogates respond to these through their experience.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I love that you have both the kind of Greek chorus of online supporters, and then, you've really thought it through, it seems, with the family members telling them all the different perspectives.
Thank
It sounds like a fantastic piece of work, and thank you so much for sharing it with us. It's so unique as well.